I don't have the energy to explain, and that doesn't mean I don't care. Identity, capacity, and the beginning of silence. What silence actually means. I want to start by saying something clearly, because this is where most people misunderstand me. I didn't stop explaining myself because I stopped caring. I stopped explaining myself because explaining became another demand on a system that was already overloaded. There's a difference between not caring and not having capacity. And most people don't know how to tell the difference. If you're listening to this and you've gone quiet lately, not because you're angry, not because you're bitter, not because you don't love people, but because you don't have the energy to keep translating your internal experience into words, this is for you. This isn't medical advice. I'm not here to diagnose anything. I'm not here to tell anyone what they should do. I'm here because this is what my life has actually looked like. Silence doesn't always mean distance. Sometimes silence means survival. Who I was before limits. There was a version of me who could explain everything. I could talk things through. I could show up. I could multitask. I could adapt. I could push through discomfort and still keep going. I knew how to be dependable. I knew how to be present. I knew how to handle pressure. That version of me didn't disappear overnight. She faded, quietly. And that fading was confusing because mentally, I still felt like the same person. But physically and emotionally, I wasn't operating on the same system anymore. People still expected the old version. Sometimes I expected her too. Military conditioning and carryover. Military training teaches you endurance. You learn how to override discomfort. You learn how to compartmentalize. You learn how to function under pressure even when something inside you is breaking. That training doesn't turn off when you leave the service. It stays in your nervous system. So when your body starts sending different signals, pain, fatigue, brain fog, emotional shutdown, it creates conflict. Your training says push. Your body says stop. Your mind gets caught in the middle. Explaining that conflict to people who haven't lived it feels impossible. So you try anyway. The first explanations. I explained why I was tired even after sleeping. I explained why my body hurt even when nothing looked wrong. I explained why motivation didn't show up on demand. I explained why today felt different from yesterday. I explained because I didn't want people to think I didn't care. I explained because I didn't want to be misunderstood. I explained because I thought understanding would make things easier. But explaining isn't just talking. Explaining is emotional labor. What explaining actually costs. Explaining means scanning your body to figure out what hurts today. Explaining means checking your mind to see how much fog you're carrying. Explaining means choosing words carefully so you don't sound dramatic, negative, weak, or too much. Explaining means staying regulated while describing things that already cost you energy. Every explanation takes something out of you. And when you're dealing with pain, PTSD, depression, memory issues, and cognitive fatigue, energy isn't unlimited. It's rationed. The mental rehearsal loop. Before I stopped explaining, my mind was always preparing. I rehearsed texts before sending them. I practiced how to cancel plans without sounding unreliable. I prepared explanations for conversations that hadn't even happened yet. Even when I was alone, I wasn't resting. I was anticipating, bracing, managing future reactions. My mind was never off duty. That constant readiness drained my focus, my memory, and my emotional bandwidth. I wasn't just tired, I was worn down. When explaining stops helping, at some point, explaining stopped leading to relief. It led to more questions, more advice I didn't ask for, more comparisons that didn't fit my life. Sometimes it led to subtle minimization. Sometimes it led to silence after vulnerability. Instead of feeling supported, I felt exposed. Instead of feeling lighter, I felt emptier. That's when I realized something hard. I was spending more energy explaining my limits than actually living within them. The first pullback. There wasn't a dramatic decision. It happened quietly. I shortened my answers. I stopped correcting every misunderstanding. I stopped volunteering details about how hard things were. And something unexpected happened. I felt a small sense of relief. Not healing, not peace, but space. Silence as protection. Explaining less wasn't giving up. It wasn't shutting people out. It was self-preservation. Silence became a way to protect what little energy I had left. It gave me room to breathe. It gave me room to function. It gave me room to exist without performing. And that's where this story really begins. Silence didn't come from not caring. It came from needing to survive. And once I stopped explaining, I started noticing just how much explaining had been costing me all along. Pain, PTSD, depression, memory, and the weight of waiting. Living inside a body that doesn't cooperate. Once I stopped explaining everything, I started noticing how much my body had been dictating my days. Not in dramatic ways, in small, constant ways. Pain that doesn't spike loudly, but never fully leaves. Stiffness that greets me before my thoughts do. A back that reminds me, every time I move, that things have changed. There are mornings where I wake up and my first question isn't, what do I need to do today? It's what can my body handle today? That question alone changes how you live, because you stop planning in advance. You stop assuming tomorrow will feel like today. You learn to move moment by moment. Explaining that to someone who wakes up with predictable energy feels impossible. Pain that steals focus before it steals movement. Pain doesn't just hurt, it distracts. It pulls attention away from everything else. It makes thinking harder. It makes remembering harder. It makes concentrating feel like trying to hold water in your hands. There are times when I'm mid-thought and it just disappears. Not because I don't care, not because I'm not trying, but because my system is already managing too much at once. Explaining cognitive fatigue feels like trying to describe a color someone has never seen. So eventually, you stop trying. PTSD and the nervous system that never fully rests. PTSD isn't just flashbacks. It's hypervigilance. It's being on edge even when nothing is wrong. It's your body staying alert long after the danger has passed. It's exhaustion that comes from constantly scanning your environment. It's a nervous system that doesn't know how to fully stand down. That constant alertness eats energy quietly. And when your nervous system is already overloaded, explaining how you feel becomes one more stressor. So silence becomes regulation. Depression isn't always sadness. Depression doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like neutrality, like things feeling flat, like motivation disappearing without warning, like caring deeply, but not having the emotional fuel to engage. Explaining depression to people who expect sadness feels useless. Because when you say I'm depressed, they expect tears. They don't expect exhaustion. They don't expect numbness. They don't expect silence. So you stop explaining. Memory loss and the shame that comes with it. Memory issues have been one of the hardest parts to live with. Short-term memory, long-term memory, focus that comes and goes. Memory loss creates shame fast because people assume you weren't listening, you didn't care, you weren't paying attention. You find yourself apologizing constantly. I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I need a reminder. After a while, even apologizing gets exhausting. Explaining memory issues feels like asking for grace you're not sure people want to give. So you go quiet. The emotional cost of being misread. Being misread over and over does something to you. When people interpret your silence as indifference, when they assume your forgetfulness is lack of effort, when they see your withdrawal as disinterest, it hurts. But correcting them takes energy you don't have. So you let the misunderstanding sit, and that creates distance. Not because you want distance, but because you can't afford the cost of closing it. Waiting on systems that move slowly. Waiting is its own kind of exhaustion. Waiting for decisions, waiting for approvals, waiting for recognition that what you're dealing with is real. Living in that in-between space changes how you see the world. You're not fully supported. You're not fully stable. You're not fully seen. Explaining that uncertainty to people who think systems work quickly feels pointless. So you stop explaining that too. The identity shift. No one prepares you for. One of the hardest parts of disability isn't the pain. It's the identity shift. You go from being capable, dependable, productive, to negotiating your energy daily. You still know your worth. You still know what you bring to the table. But access to that version of yourself is inconsistent. Explaining that contradiction is exhausting, so you keep it to yourself. Knowing your worth without being able to perform it. This is hard to say out loud. I know my value. I know my experience. I know my intelligence. I know what I'm capable of when my system cooperates. But knowing your worth doesn't mean you can access it on demand. Energy gates everything. Pain gates everything. Mental health gates everything. Explaining that to others feels like defending something that should be obvious. So I stopped trying. When explaining starts to feel unsafe, at some point, explaining stops feeling neutral. It starts to feel risky because vulnerability doesn't always lead to support. Sometimes it leads to silence. Sometimes it leads to judgment. Sometimes it leads to people disappearing. After enough of that, you protect yourself. Silence becomes armor. The slow withdrawal. Withdrawal didn't happen all at once. It was gradual. Less texting, shorter calls, more time alone. Not because I wanted to disappear, but because I needed to conserve. I needed to survive. By the time I stopped explaining altogether, silence wasn't a choice. It was the only thing that allowed me to keep functioning. And that's where isolation entered. Not as a goal, but as a consequence. Isolation, guilt, and the quiet negotiations that shape every day. Isolation wasn't the goal. I need to say this clearly. Isolation was never the goal. I didn't wake up one day and decide to pull away from people. I didn't want to disappear. Isolation happened because being alone cost less. Less explaining, less managing reactions, less emotional labor, less pressure to perform. When I'm alone, I don't have to justify how I feel. I don't have to translate my limits. I don't have to reassure anyone that I'm okay. I can just exist. And when your system is already overwhelmed, that matters more than anything else. The safety of predictability. Being alone is predictable. I know what my body will experience in my own space. I know the level of noise, the level of stimulation, the level of expectation. There are no surprises. There's no sudden demand to explain why I'm quiet. No pressure to fill silence. No obligation to perform energy I don't have. Predictability became safety. Not because it was ideal, but because it was manageable. The trade-off. Nobody talks about isolation gives you peace. But it also takes things away. It takes spontaneity. It takes shared moments. It takes casual connection. You start missing people quietly, not in a dramatic way, in small moments. When something happens and there's no one to tell. When you want to laugh but don't have the energy to reach out. When you want connection but not conversation. That tension sits with you. The guilt of pulling away. Guilt shows up fast when you isolate. Guilt for not responding. Guilt for canceling plans. Guilt for needing space. Even when you know you need it, guilt doesn't disappear. It whispers things like, you should be doing more. You should be handling this better. You're letting people down. And that guilt takes energy too. Sometimes more energy than the interaction itself. Learning to sit with the guilt. One of the hardest lessons has been learning to sit with guilt without letting it control me. Not all guilt means you're doing things wrong. Sometimes guilt shows up when you stop overextending yourself. Sometimes guilt is just a sign that you're changing patterns. Learning to tolerate that discomfort is part of survival. The daily negotiations. Nobody sees every day involves quiet decisions. They don't look dramatic from the outside, but they add up. Do I answer this message now or wait until I have more energy? Do I explain why I've been quiet or let it pass? Do I push myself to show up and risk days of recovery? Do I protect my peace and risk being misunderstood? These questions run in the background constantly. They shape how I move through the world, and they're exhausting. Wanting connection without capacity. This part is hard to explain. I still want connection. I still care about people. I just don't always have the capacity to engage the way people expect. I want presence without pressure, connection without explanation, understanding without interrogation. That kind of connection is rare, so I choose carefully. Letting go of the need to be fully understood. There was a time when I believed that if I explained myself clearly enough, people would understand. That belief kept me explaining long past my limits. Eventually, I had to accept something painful. Not everyone is capable of understanding experiences they haven't lived, and no amount of explaining will change that. Letting go of the need to be fully understood was freeing and lonely. Both things can be true. Choosing who gets access. I started saving my energy for people who felt safe, people who didn't demand explanations, people who didn't take my quiet personally, people who understood that my energy changes. I don't need many people. I need a few steady connections. Quality over quantity became survival. The grief that comes with change. There's grief in this process. Grief for the version of myself who was more available. Grief for relationships that couldn't adapt. Grief for the ease I once had. Grief doesn't always show up as sadness. Sometimes it shows up as distance. Sometimes it shows up as silence. Isolation as regulation, not failure. Isolation isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's regulation. It's the nervous system trying to calm down. It's the body trying to conserve energy. It's the mind trying to reduce overload. Understanding that helped me stop judging myself so harshly. Isolation didn't mean I gave up. It meant I was adapting. And adaptation is not weakness, it's survival. Functioning, anyway, redefining strength and learning how to stay. The moment I stopped trying to fix myself, there came a point where I realized something important. I wasn't broken. I was exhausted from trying to be someone I no longer had the capacity to be. So I stopped trying to fix the isolation. I stopped treating my limits like a problem that needed to be solved. Instead, I asked a different question. How do I function anyway? That shift changed everything. Functioning doesn't look the way people expect. Functioning isn't always visible. It doesn't always look like progress. It doesn't always look productive. Sometimes functioning looks like getting out of bed when your body doesn't want to move, eating something even if it's not ideal, answering one message instead of disappearing completely, choosing rest instead of forcing output. That still counts, even when no one claps for it. Letting go of motivation. Motivation became unreliable for me. Some days it simply doesn't show up. So I stopped waiting for it. I stopped telling myself I had to feel ready before I acted. Instead, I leaned into structure. Small routines, simple repetition, gentle consistency. Not to be impressive, but to stay anchored. Structure as a lifeline. Structure doesn't have to be rigid. It just has to exist. It gives the day a shape, something to lean on when energy is low. Doing the same small things at the same time helps me move forward even when my mind feels foggy. Structure carries me when motivation disappears. The battle with memory and focus. There are days when my memory feels unreliable. I forget conversations. I forget tasks. I forget what I was doing mid-action. That used to scare me. Now I work around it. I write things down. I repeat actions. I simplify expectations. I stop punishing myself for needing reminders. Needing support doesn't mean I'm failing. It means I'm adapting. Redefining strength. Strength isn't pushing through everything. Strength isn't ignoring pain. Strength isn't forcing yourself to function at the same pace as everyone else. Strength is listening to your limits. Strength is adjusting without giving up. Strength is choosing sustainability over burnout. That took me a long time to accept. Quiet isn't laziness. Quiet doesn't mean nothing is happening. A lot is happening internally. Processing, regulating, recovering. I had to stop equating stillness with failure. Sometimes quiet is necessary. Sometimes it's healing. Learning not to apologize for existing differently. I used to apologize constantly for being quiet, for canceling plans, for needing space, for functioning differently. Eventually, I realized how much energy that took. I don't apologize for my limits anymore. I explain when it feels safe. I stay silent when it doesn't. Both choices are valid. The fear of being left behind. One of the hardest emotions to face is the fear of being left behind. Watching life move forward while you feel stuck. Watching others progress while you're conserving energy just to survive. That fear can push you to overextend. It can make you ignore your limits. Learning to move at my own pace meant accepting that my timeline looks different. That was painful and freeing. Staying connected without burning out. I don't disappear completely. That's intentional. I keep small threads of connection alive. A message here, a check-in there, a moment of presence when I can manage it. Not because I owe anyone access, but because I don't want to disappear from my own life, choosing presence over performance. I no longer try to perform wellness. I don't fake energy. I don't pretend I'm okay when I'm not. I show up as I am when I can. Presence matters more than performance. Accepting that some days are just survival. Some days are not about growth. They're about endurance, getting through without spiraling, protecting your mental space, staying regulated. Those days count too, even if nothing gets checked off a list. The decision to stay. There were times when staying felt heavy, when disappearing seemed easier. What kept me here was not motivation, it was connection. Small reasons, quiet anchors. The understanding that this version of me still matters, even when I don't feel strong, even when I don't feel productive, even when I don't feel understood. Staying for the version of me that comes next. I stay for the version of me that hasn't arrived yet. The version that has more energy, more clarity, more ease. I don't rush toward that version. I just make space for them to arrive. If you're listening and this feels familiar, if this resonates with you, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not weak. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're navigating something heavy. And you're still here. That matters. Functioning anyway. This isn't about fixing everything. It's about functioning anyway. It's about adapting instead of quitting. It's about honoring your limits without disappearing. It's about staying, even when it's quiet, even when it's slow, even when it doesn't look impressive. Closing, I don't have the energy to explain everything I carry. And that doesn't mean I don't care. It means I'm learning how to live within my limits and keep going anyway.